At the start of last winter I was not very well equipped. I didn't have proper gloves. The room I spent the most time at home, which is my office, didn't have any heating system, so long story short, I ended up with frostbites all over my hands. It was too late, there was nothing I could really do, so I just bought a pretty cheap pair of mittens, and even though they are not the best, it is definitely warmer than normal gloves. After that I kept shooting with my newly acquired mittens, and obviously you can't access your fingers with them, so I had to simplify my settings even further. In general, I'm a big advocate of the back button focus method, but with gloves it gets things a bit more complicated, so now in winter I just fully trust my autofocus. I tend to use the zone focus area on Sony, but cameras from other brands also have a similar setting where you let the camera autofocus on a big part of the center part of the frame. It is the settings that gives me the most convincing results without having to constantly moving my focus point. In the end, good photos where your subject, your main point of focus, is outside of that zone are quite rare, and when the occasion occurs, it is usually when you have more time to compose your shot and wait for a subject to enter the frame or something else to happen. In such scenario, I have pressed the shutter to focus on the desired element of the frame, lock focus with one of the easily accessible custom buttons, and recompose. For the Ricoh GR3 shooters, winter is also a good time to experience with snap focus, and the mode I use very often, the snap distance priority mode. You control everything with only the front and upper dials. You can choose between 3 levels of depth of field, from shallow to very deep, and your snap focus distance. You will always see on the left side of the screen a scale indicating what is in and out of focus. If you are interested in learning more about that, you can have a look at a video I did earlier this year explaining all that in details. Other than the focus settings, I will not reinvent the wheel. I use aperture priority mode most of the time and set the minimum shutter speed depending on how bright it is and my focal length. I know that depending on where you live, the weather element of the whole winter equation can be quite different, but we can all agree on the fact that overcast days, rainy or even snowy days are more frequent in winter. In such conditions, you should adjust your exposure compensation if you use any mode different from the fully manual mode. Usually I always recommend to underexpose slightly because digital camera sensors tend to be better at keeping details in the shadows. Highlights are more tricky to recover if you mess up your settings, and details are getting lost pretty fast. But during overcast, rainy or snowy days, I do the opposite. I slightly overexpose. Setting your exposure compensation between +0.3 and +1 should do the job perfectly. You will still have to judge what is more appropriate by looking at your screen or viewfinder. The reason for this is that the camera sees clouds and snow as very bright elements and will try to balance that by reducing the overall exposure. This phenomenon is even more obvious when it's snowing because it is likely to have the sky and the ground covered with white snow, and the camera will try to counteract that by bringing the exposure way down. Now that we know how to have a proper exposure in camera, let's see what we can do in post-production to bring those pictures to life. If you use the auto white balance setting on your camera, it will do its best to have white elements look neutral white, or if you adjust it in Lightroom using the auto white balance feature, it will do the same. They work very scientifically with a mathematical mindset, but your role as an artist is bringing your vision to life, not necessarily the world as closely as it objectively looks. So you can play with the white balance, tone curves, or color grading panel to make everything look cooler. I think it makes sense, and you can accentuate the impression of cold you have during these cold winter days. Whenever winter is around the corner, we hear from a lot of photographers, myself included, that days are getting shorter, so it's a good opportunity to spend more time shooting nighttime photos. You don't have to wait until too late to practice, and it is without doubt a great time to brush up your night photography skills. But if you have been following me for a while, you know that I am much more an early bird than a night owl. I posted several videos about early morning photo walks and received a lot of positive comments about the photos, the morning lights looking awesome and all that, and oftentimes those comments were punctuated by something like, "Oh, I wish I could do the same, but I just can't wake up that early." In winter, days are shorter, so it's getting dark earlier, yes, but it also works the other way around. The sun is rising later than usual, so it is a perfect time to ease into trying early morning photo walks. There is something so unique about shooting early in the morning when the streets and nature are still very quiet. If it's a clear day, the light is also very different from the one you have around sunset, so please give it a try. You won't regret it. You will most likely end up with good photos, benefit from more mental clarity and better ability to focus, and at the end you will feel like you own the day. Like I said before, there are also clear sunny days in winter too, of course, but unlike summer, the sun is never getting very high at a 90-degree angle, so there is overall more time where you can play with quote-unquote ideal light. Almost all throughout the day, the light will come at an angle, giving you plenty of photography opportunities and lightning scenario to play with. You can find a nice spot and try shooting backlit. That's something I love and it's quite frequent in my work. A strong angle light can also transform any location you think as boring and make it a good playground to shoot highlight and shadows type of photos. Another thing I like to do when the light is good and angled is taking a moment to understand where the light is coming from and how it interacts with my subject. Let's say you want to take a photo of a building or a house. First you check where the light is coming from and how it affects the building, where is the bright side and where is the shadow side. Then you place yourself on the shadow side of the building and experiment with different angles and distance from the subject to find what works best. Shooting from the shadow side is a very good trick to give more depth and more of a 3D effect to your photos, which I think will make them look more interesting and almost like they are more sharper than they are. There are of course other tips and things we could discuss about shooting in winter, but I will stop there for now. This video was more centered around how to adjust settings and what you can do creatively for your photography in winter. I did not mention the obvious about what gloves, what clothes or what shoes to wear, but make it simple. Just don't do like me. A good pair of gloves is probably a good investment, and otherwise use common sense. Just dress appropriately to be able to endure a few hours in the cold, and that's it. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.